Hello, and welcome to Lopes on Movies. My name is Joey Lopes, and today I am joined by Connor.
Good morning.
And Mark.
Hello.
How you doing, fellas? How you doing on this October evening is when we're recording this, I guess.
Oh, I see.
Doing
That's confusing.
okay.
So we are recording it
Yeah,
this
and you said
evening,
good
and I
morning.
say good morning.
I was confused when you said that, actually.
I mean, yeah, there's nothing we can do about this one. Yeah, it's just gonna be just
It's
a little
fine,
bit
it's
of a
fine.
confusing episode.
Really nice weather out, though, so that's good.
It's true. I've been enjoying the fall weather. You know,
Fall is nice and cool.
underrated season.
By a lot, yeah.
Well, everybody, we are here for the third episode of our David Lynch retrospective series. This is Lynchtober. I really hate that, by the way.
I think I did it. I created that name on purpose because I knew you would hate it.
Yeah, I really.
Yeah, yeah.
really
That's like
don't
a
like it.
perfect thing to get under your skin.
But nonetheless, it is nothing we can do about it now. That's just what it's going to be called.
We're all in on it.
Yep. But, you know, name aside, there's nothing better than spending the month of October watching a bunch of David Lynch movies, let's be honest. Like, I can't think of a single better thing to be doing with your time. Except maybe watching some Alfred Hitchcock movies. 'Cause I've been doing that too.
Is that better or equal?
Equal, I would say.
Equal.
You know, just watching
Okay.
great films is just a great thing to do, guys.
Yeah.
Can't complain.
If
And
there's
I think-
anything that I want you to take away from this show, it's that watching good movies is a good thing to do.
I would even
Doesn't
say
even
like,
matter if you ignore every single thing we're talking about. Just watch good movies.
Yeah.
True. And Hitchcock and Lynch are not like that far apart, really. And I know that Lynch has said before that Hitchcock is someone who inspires him. And there's even themes from
That makes
Hitchcock
sense.
films in his movies.
Oh, sure.
that you
The
can see.
king of suspense.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Well, everybody,
Actor.
this episode is going to be I think a fun one for all of us because we're going to talk about, you know, both one of our favorite movies ever and I guess one of our favorite TV shows ever, which is, you know, kind of a rare treat. So
Or 2/3 of it.
yeah, two-thirds of the TV show. We'll get to part 3 a little later on. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, last week we talked about Eraserhead and The Elephant Man, which were David Lynch's two first feature films. And I think his career kind of took an interesting turn after those movies, because obviously Eraserhead was really popular with filmmakers and people thought it was really interesting. Then the story, as we told last week, Mel Brooks saw it and he wanted David Lynch to direct a movie for him, and that movie turned out to be The Elephant Man. The Elephant Man, a fairly conventional movie for David Lynch, but was still done very, very well. Ended up getting him Oscar nominations, and now he's like the hottest guy in Hollywood. Everybody wants to work with him, including, I should say, the great George Lucas.
Yes.
Which is one of Mark's favorite stories, which is how
I love this. This is why George is one of my favorite people.
Which is how, like, so obviously if you know the timeline for Star Wars, the original Star Wars came out in 1977, and the sequel,
Yep.
Empire Strikes Back, came out in 1980, which is right around the time that David Lynch was getting his start. I believe that
Yep.
The Elephant Man came out in 1980 as well, right?
Yeah, the timeline lines up like
yeah.
perfectly.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
you got to imagine George sits through Eraser. I'm sure he loved it actually.
Oh,
George
yeah.
adored Eraserhead. Then he went to see an Elephant Man, and he's got literally the biggest movie ever made, I think, at this point, right?
Yep, Return of the
Like
Jedi
in terms
in
of
the works.
in terms of like returns, it did the best box office like ever at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And he thinks to himself, who should direct my next movie for this? Ah, yes, the guy that made Eraserhead.
Which is pretty similar to Mel Brooks. Is like, yeah, who's gonna direct my pretty conventional like Hollywood film? This guy who made Eraserhead, you know, like.
So George Lucas is a lunatic, and that's why I love him.
Yeah. You can't-
Unfortunately, Lynch did not quite have the creative. He's not the same creative wavelength as George. is
It's
the
true.
nice way to
It's
put
true.
it.
Yeah, David Lynch he met with George about about doing the movie, and just look up the video of David
video
Lynch
is
telling that
incredible.
story of his meeting with George Lucas, and you'll get the full picture.
It
Let's
Every
just say
second
truly
of
wonderful.
that video is magic.
it wasn't the right fit. We'll put it that way. But
Oh
it
man.
was interesting how shortly after that fell through, David Lynch did sign on to direct an adaptation of Dune.
Mhm.
What's that? Frank Herbert. That's the writer.
Yes,
Am I
you
right?
got it. Yep.
Okay, so that was a famously troubled production, David Lynch's adaptation of Dune. So much
Yep.
so that he disowns it. It's the only movie out of any movie he's made that he has absolutely no fondness for whatsoever. Because apparently the studio was very, very insistent on things and didn't let him do what he wanted to do with it.
Yep.
And of course, the movie was a famous bomb, gigantic disaster.
The That said, we're not talking about it, but if you're a Dune fan, it's actually worth going and watching some of the clips from it because
Mhm.
individually the scenes they're pretty good. Like the Fear is the Mind Killer scene is wonderful,
Mhm.
but the movie's an incoherent mess because Lynch not only like is Lynch, but he got no final cut on it.
Mhm.
So it's kind of like an odd sort of circumstance where people that enjoyed the books can sort of get something out of it because they'll understand what's going on to some degree,
Mhm.
and everybody else is kind of just completely lost.
Right.
Yeah, and Lynch has
But
said
yeah,
that too. Like he liked certain parts of it, but he didn't have final cut, like you said, and his true what he wanted to do was not there. So it's just the biggest sadness for him. So
Yeah.
he doesn't
yep,
like it. But there are certain things that came from Dune, like our actor Kyle MacLachlan, who went on to
It's
be
true.
in the star of both of these two that we're going to be talking about today.
It's true. It's true. Yeah, I would say if there's anything like really huge that came out of Dune, it's definitely that collaboration between David Lynch and Kyle MacLachlan, which has yielded so much wonderful work over the years. And yeah, I guess we can just kind of dive right into that. So the first thing we're going to talk about is of course the movie Blue Velvet, which is from 1986. This was the
yep.
movie that David Lynch did after Dune. Mark, how about you give a little synopsis of Blue Velvet?
Will do. The discovery of a severed human ear found in a field leads a young man on an investigation related to a beautiful, mysterious nightclub singer and a group of psychopathic criminals who have kidnapped her child. So it's kind of interesting because we're probably going to get into this in a bit, but there's a lot of parallels in this movie to like Twin Peaks,
Mhm.
up to and including Kyle MacLachlan being somewhat of an investigator
Mhm.
character. Of course,
Mhm.
here he's kind of like a snot-nosed kid who's just butting into a situation he doesn't necessarily have business being in,
Mhm. Mhm.
but it has the sort of twisted Americana vibe of what uh Twin Peaks also kind of has. Like
Yes.
the very first shot in Blue Velvet, if I recall correctly, is like a white picket fence and just gorgeous like verdant field or yards of green that slowly pans down to just an ear laying in the grass. And if I remember right, it even goes into the dirt afterwards, but I'm not positive
Yeah,
on
you're
that.
close. There's
Yeah.
there is that moment that goes into the ear. There's also that wonderful moment where the camera zooms into the grass and there's these disgusting bugs
That's it.
writhing
Yeah.
around.
Yeah, and the whole
Um
time
So it's
it
like
just
this
feels
beautiful,
uneasy. Like
yeah.
there's a
from the
a
very
guy
get-go.
waving from like a fire truck going by, but
Yeah.
it feels
Mhm.
uncomfortable. Like
Very
it's
surreal.
yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So I think Blue Velvet is one of those. I think it's one of those movies that if you watch it before you've started watching a lot of movies, it'll kind of like expand your brain a little bit. To me, it's it's still like the ultimate David Lynch movie to me. I think like if there's anything I would recommend people to watch first to try to like understand to some capacity David Lynch, it's definitely Blue Velvet.
Yeah, and I also would
Yeah.
say that it has like a certain the everything in it can appeal to somebody. Like the movie has
Mhm.
action, comedy, like drama, mystery, romance, the surrealness, and
It
like
really is the
it's
full package.
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And stand out. There's just so many great performances in this movie too.
Absolutely.
It's just wonderful, especially Kyle MacLachlan. Obviously, he's just so good as
Jeffrey
Jeffrey.
Beaumont.
He's
Yes.
just like he's not quite suave. He's like growing into it, right? He doesn't feel like all that charismatic, but he's got this charm to him that is just
Hmm.
like undeniable, and it
Hmm.
comes through in like every scene.
Yeah.
I believe Dennis Hopper plays the bad guy.
Yep. Dennis Hopper playing
yeah.
Frank, who
he
plays Frank
is
Booth.
the absolute best. Like he is so good at his Frank.
It's almost like scary how much he inhabits the role of this guy.
I think
He
there's
is
a famous
unhinged.
story about that too, where like when Dennis Hopper read the script for this, and he was going through some like troubled times, I think in his life at that point too.
Yeah.
And when he read the script, he pretty much said, "I am Frank Booth."
He said, "You have to let me play Frank."
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was
Yep.
if I remember right, that his agent actually had to call up like Lynch or at least the producer and say like, yeah, Dennis has cleaned up himself and he really thinks he needs to play Frank. It's interesting because like Lynch sort of does have his own troupe that he leans on. A lot of like really big time directors do, but he won't just cast Kyle just because he likes him. It has to be the right role for these people. It
Absolutely.
isn't a like friends doing friends favors. Dennis Hopper is Frank.
Mhm.
Kyle is Jeffrey.
Yeah,
and it's like you can really see that come through in the performances every time.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Yeah, Lynch is very, very meticulous about casting. Like he, from what I understand, he doesn't really audition actors in your typical sense, where you have them come in, read lines, see if he can see him in the part. He just kind of talks to them and just tries to imagine them in the part, right?
Yeah,
and
he doesn't want it to be forced.
Exactly, and he just has a great eye for like not just performance, but the way an actor looks, the way that the energy they kind of bring to just their performance, what they are, and as a result, not even just the big actors in David Lynch movies. There's tons of like very bit parts in these movies that stand out for how evocative the people he chose to play those parts are.
Absolutely. Yeah, it just drips with character sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's incredible.
This was also the one of the first major roles for Laura Dern, who ended up being huge shortly after that. And also, I have to mention that this was the first collaboration between Lynch and composer Angelo Badalamenti, who we would see work with Lynch on pretty much everything going forward, as far as I'm aware. And yeah, I think his style has become pretty much synonymous with David Lynch movies at this point. With these kind of like dream pop synth vibes.
I wanted to bring up that because so you're talking about the music now. Angelo Badalamenti is excellent, and then there was actually something that Lynch said earlier this week in the Weather Report. I don't know if you've
I didn't see this.
Yeah, so there was a part where he was talking about what he's thinking of, and he was like reciting a poem, and at the end of the poem he was talking about the Heartbreak Hotel, which there was no context, of course. So I looked into this a little bit. And he's brought it up before, and Heartbreak Hotel goes back to Elvis, his inspiration with Elvis, and like the quote. If I have it here, let me see if I do. Yes, I do. So they were talking about he was being interviewed about an album that was coming out, and then when Blue Velvet was coming out, in the wake of things like Happy Days and American Graffiti. People were painting the 50s and 60s in a very nice, shiny way, and the way he uses older music really flipped that on the ear, flipped it on its ear, because this movie has some themes that are, pretty extreme, which we haven't really gotten into yet. But
in dreams I walk with you.
Right. So Lynch is saying, 50s music held a happiness for sure for him, but Elvis also sings Heartbreak Hotel. It's a song of kind of sweet sadness that. And he goes, in that dream thing that could go either way, like either happy or sad, and that's the kind of that I think that fits so well with Blue Velvet, especially. And then he goes on and says, so if you listen to what's popular in the 50s and 60s, he said like 56 on maybe, and it's a summer night and you're listening to this and you're slow dancing in the basement with a girl, you kind of go back in time. And there's a scene that's almost exactly like that in this film, where Kyle MacLachlan and Laura Dern are dancing together in like a basement kind of thing. And the way that Lynch uses music, whether it's the music that comes from Angelo Badalamenti, who does the original scores, or the music that he selects, which I think is very key for this movie, Blue Velvet, because there's a couple of versions of the song Blue Velvet. One that's like an original version that I can't remember the guy's name who sung that one, but I know that Lynch wasn't very fond of it at the beginning. He liked the lyrics though, and then one that's sung by Isabella Rossellini, who we didn't even talk about yet, who I think we definitely should, because that is definitely a key part to this whole movie in general.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, it's very important.
But the music is so key, and I think that like Lynch understands music so well, and you can't like, and it's not only just the music, the scores, but it's also like the sound editing, because Lynch also does the sound editing himself also, in collaboration with the others. So just the music is just top notch for every David Lynch movie, especially this one. So I'm not sure which way we want to go. Can we talk about Isabella Rossellini maybe?
Yeah,
of course we can. I mean, if we're talking about all the memorable characters, I think you can't ignore her performance, and just the her character is so interesting.
Yeah.
I think I remember distinctly that Roger Ebert's review of Blue Velvet was extremely negative, and the reason for that almost entirely hinged on Isabella Rossellini playing Dorothy, and how, I mean, to put it plainly, her character goes through a lot in the movie, and there's, I think the most fascinating thing is just the psychology of her character, which, it's hard to go into specifics. So I feel like being kind of blown away by this movie is a experience that I wouldn't want to I wouldn't want to take from anybody, but especially her relationship with Jeffrey and their kind of mutual perversions. If well,
her and Frank too,
and Frank,
actually.
yeah, certainly Frank.
Oh man.
I mean, there's entire you could spend years talking about the psychology of these characters.
Yeah, I think if I'm remembering correctly, what you're saying about Roger Ebert felt that it was like a pretty exploitative and like demeaning role, right? And he was very critical of Lynch for that. And then I think like Isabella Rossellini was like asked about that before, and she was like, no, I'm fine. Like, this is art.
I feel like she even her character shows a lot of strength in the face of all these like highly adverse situations that she ends 100%. Up in. She's got she's turns like, you can't say enough about any performance in this movie. They're all just fantastic. She's got like this like she seems kind of fragile, but despite that, like, she never breaks in the face of all of this. And she really embodies that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah, can I also bring up Jack Nance? Jack Nance's appearance is just magic. I don't even want to give it away, but like, it's magic.
Well, that's what I'm saying. He doesn't play a major role in the movie, but you won't forget him.
After you start recognizing Jack Nance, he's like so like iconic. You can't not like he's a character actor, right? But he like shines through it despite that with like these certain mannerisms that he has.
Absolutely.
Especially after Eraserhead.
Well, I think we've talked enough about Blue Velvet. I mean, when I say enough, I mean we've talked about as much as we can for the 30-minute time frame that we have in this episode.
I mean, we could go on and on. How about the one-liners in Blue Velvet too?
There are so many quotable lines in Blue Velvet.
My gosh.
There's one in particular that you can't not say after you hear two certain beer brands for the rest of your life.
Oh, I
You're
say
gonna
it.
be cursed.
I say it every time I drink either of those two beers. I highly recommend everybody watch Blue Velvet. You have to.
Yeah, I think it's a rite of passage.
We're not allowed to say that line on the show, unfortunately.
But maybe you're somebody who's like, Blue Velvet, that's a little too intense for me. I kind of like the idea. It's like a kind of a mystery type thing. Looking at the seedy underbelly of America and like suburbia. That's great, but it's a little bit too intense. Is there anything else I can watch that has sort of a similar vibe? Well, I mean, yeah. So the other thing we want to talk about, of course, today is Twin Peaks, which needs no introduction. Everybody knows Twin Peaks. It's one of the most famous television shows of all time. Recently got a revival on Showtime, which we're not really going to talk about much today because that really needs its own
Joey,
thing.
it was 3 years ago.
I know. It feels like yesterday. It's definitely
For Twin Peaks timelines, that's actually pretty good.
I yearn for those days, man. 2017, every like Wednesday night or whatever it was.
It feels like a decade ago.
That was a magical couple of months. But before I digress too far, so Twin Peaks was a show that David Lynch and Mark Frost created a little bit after Blue Velvet. I don't remember exactly when Twin Peaks came out. Do you know, Connor?
1990.
1990, yeah.
So they pretty much started
Blue Velvet.
Right, so they were working on it in like the late 80s, so it was pretty close.
Yeah, and without going into too much detail, because we don't have a tremendous amount of time left for this episode, what is it about Twin Peaks that you guys think is so special?
Well, it really changed the game of television, of something that could be cinematic on TV, and I mean, I think it's kind of unique because this aired on like network television. This was on this was on CBS. Like this and
not even just that. I'm pretty sure it was one of the very first like TV serials that was like distinctly not episodic. It had a through line the entire way.
Yep.
You could watch an episode without it, like, but you would be lost if you jumped in the middle of the series.
Yeah,
it's
no, that's, I think at the time a lot of people compared it to a soap opera because it had those kind of serial elements as well as kind of like a parody of a soap opera vibe to it.
It has a feeling a little bit like a soap opera, but it's a lot.
But it really was kind of paving the way for what television is mostly now, which is the idea of serialized television. You have a continuing story in every episode. It's not something that resets after every episode, like a sitcom or something like that.
And it was the very first one like that.
Yeah, it was pretty rare at that time. Yeah.
Obviously, I mean, the characters are what makes this show. You absolutely, I mean, not all of them are like completely charming or lovable, but so many of them are just these weirdos that are just like so memorable and interesting. Obviously headed off by Kyle MacLachlan himself, who on like I rewatched a bit of it. I kind of almost feel like Kyle MacLachlan is not quite a self-insert, but he has a lot of the same mannerisms that Lynch himself does in real life. It's kind of interesting. And I've actually seen interviews where I forget which actress it was, but mentioned that Kyle and David are very much on the same wavelength.
Yeah.
Like they all went to lunch together to talk to her about being in one of the movies, and David and Kyle just immediately started doing like weird stuff with napkins or something like that.
Yeah.
It was very bizarre.
I've heard that story. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, so essentially what it is Kyle MacLachlan plays this FBI agent who is investigating the murder of a young woman in like this crazy town of Twin Peaks, where there's all these characters, like Mark is saying, like that are weird, and they're trying to figure out what's happening in the town. And the idea of the show was that he would be in to investigate this murder of this woman, Laura Palmer. Everything revolves around that central mystery of what happened to Laura Palmer, and then from there it expands, and you see what's happening inside the town, like soap opera kind of things. And then Angelo Badalamenti did the music too, and it's so like hyper exaggerated of scenes, and it's excellent. You know,
it's also really, really good at being like highly emotional too.
Oh yeah,
like there's a lot of sincerity in there.
Yeah,
it doesn't feel like it's trying to play it off sort of in a detached kind of mood.
Yeah,
where it's more along the lines of trying to pull you in, especially poor Laura's parents.
Oh my
just
God.
Like so actually almost everybody. I watched the pilot. That whole like first act of it is like almost emotionally tiring, just because of how like devastated this town is by the death of Laura Palmer.
Yeah,
it's just like continuous.
It would be utterly like devastating if it weren't for Agent Cooper, Kyle MacLachlan.
Agent Cooper just comes in like a whirlwind and just completely sweeps the rest of the show off its feet. and he steals it. He's so good.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the larger point is if you haven't watched Twin Peaks before, I think it's like a historical necessity, if nothing else.
Yeah.
Like you have to
Yeah.
have some familiarity with Twin Peaks to understand the landscape of television in today. But beyond that, it is just a really interesting piece of work. A little bit controversial in its second season for a variety of reasons. Actually, one of the main ones being that the network wanted them to solve the mystery of the show, and as a result of that, David Lynch kind of lost interest and was absent for much of the production of the second season, which you can tell
Did he just
as soon as he's
Yeah.
gone that it starts to feel very self-conscious and kind of spinning its wheels a little bit. But he did come back for the final episode of season 2, which
he just walked though, right? Like he stayed to the point of the reveal and then just left.
pretty much, yeah, and he didn't come back until the final episode
The
of the
last
season.
3, and he managed to pull it back in terms of it being quality,
Yes.
but not in terms of audience. It was already dead at that
At that point, it
Yeah,
was dead.
that
Yeah.
was the problem. So like, and I'll tell you, a lot of credit of Twin Peaks does have to go to Mark Frost for
Oh, yeah,
like
100%.
the storyline of the characters and everything like that. It really goes to Mark Frost, who's much more of a structure guy, regular, traditional, more storyteller. And then Lynch is, has his surreal aspect and everything that he offers. And the two meshed really well together, which is why the first season and probably the first half of season 2 is so strong,
Yeah.
because they work well. But then once Lynch leaves the show, it just gets like silly and like
Yeah.
weird. Which there's
Yeah.
still some decent stuff in there, but it doesn't. It loses it loses what it's supposed to do. And I think that's why Lynch left the show mainly, is
Yeah.
because it was like what I was saying. The show was supposed to revolve around like this central mystery of like what happened to Laura Palmer, and then once that is not there, it kind of changes things. But then when
Yeah.
Lynch comes back and they actually did try to like make an effort to keep the show going, but the viewership was gone. And I'll say, like, if I had to say a few of my favorite episodes, it's the pilot. And then it's that episode where Cooper is throwing the rocks to try to like
Oh, yeah.
mystically figure out who the murderer is early on, and he calls it the Tibetan method, which is just fantastic. and that's I'm pretty sure that influence actually comes from Mark Frost, and the combination of the quirkiness of the two, it just works well, and it adds to it. My other favorite episode is definitely the finale, with the way that Lynch kind of just said, like, all the stuff that they were doing the second half of like the season 2, that he was just like, nope, and he got the ship right back on track and went back to what they were supposed to be doing. And what the way it was probably the greatest cliffhanger ever in like the history of television. They wanted another season. They did, but they didn't have the viewership and they couldn't do it. And then we all were blessed who love Twin Peaks, that 25 years later, we've got Twin Peaks: The Return, which we will
You
eventually
did
talk
skip
about.
one little thing in the middle there that people were somewhat unhappy about at the time, but
Twin
yes,
Peaks Fire Walk with Me.
which
Yeah.
is quite a good movie,
It is.
but it is not what the people wanted it to be.
It
That
is
is
not.
true.
And frankly, I'm not sure Twin Peaks: The Return is what people wanted either. But
Yeah, but it's so good.
it's what we got, and man, I can't wait to talk about that, because that's got to be one of the greatest things ever made. We'll have to wait to get into that one until towards the end of this month, I think. But anyway, thank you guys
Yeah.
for listening to this episode. Much appreciated. I hope you enjoyed our discussions of these movies, and I hope you'll be looking forward to seeing what we're talking about next week, which I think like the 90s David Lynch, like after Twin Peaks, because I think we're going to like The Straight Story and
Wild at Heart.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I haven't seen either of those movies, so this should be a good one.
It'll be interesting, yeah.
All right. Have a good morning, everybody.